Hello, everyone. This is Adam Fishman, the Executive Director of American Friends of Likud, and I want to welcome you all to another edition of our podcast with very significant people. Today, we are with my good friend, the International Director of Gesher, JJ Sussman. JJ, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
JJ, first of all, I want by the way, for those of you who don't know what Gesher is, JJ is going to tell us a little bit about it, but just to give you the, I guess, the pop high points, that would be Gesher is one of the producers of the show Int'l, if you're familiar with it. The third season is out now on Netflix, now on US Netflix. You can watch it with English subtitles. But JJ, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Gesher is, because I want to get into a discussion about how it impacts where we're at today in Israel.
Gesher, many of you may know, Gesher for decades has really been at the forefront of trying to bring together different sectors of the Jewish people, whether they be Haredim, Chilonim, Datim, so religious, secular, ultra-Orthodox, and recently, I would say over the last number of years, we've had a particular focus on the Israel-diaspora relationship, focused on bringing Israelis, making them more aware of diaspora Jewry and trying to engender a sense of responsibility to Jews outside of Israel on one hand. On the other hand, a real focus also on trying to bridge the gap between Haredim and general Israeli society.
So let me ask you a question. Today is Yom HaShoah. Today we actually stood for 2 minutes during a siren. Silently, the entire country stops. Everyone stands. I even saw a tweet from Gil Hoffman from the Knesset to certain labor members of Knesset who usually wouldn't stand or stop during Yom HaZikaron for the Israeli soldiers. I believe that was an Arab member of the Labor Party, but she did stand and was silent during Yom HaShoah. Even after
Just to point out, that was right after Gil's tweet about the first Jewish Cub to hit a home run in Wrigley Field.
He's
talking about diaspora Jewry.
Right, he's a Chicagoan through and through. But what I wanted to ask was, even after the Shoah, even after the Holocaust, we had, coming out of the Holocaust, you would think there would be an opportunity for all Jews who were all treated exactly the same by the Nazis to come together before they're coming to Eretz Israel, to Israel, to America, wherever it is. But in fact, we know that there are tons of stories of all different disparate groups within Judaism, within the Jews, from the communists to the Zionists to the Mizrahi to the Bundist, who were all fighting and still fighting then, and you would think it would be something else. Has it changed so much today, now that we're looking at obviously not to that extent, but certainly you wrote a piece, an op-ed piece in this week's Jerusalem Post that was titled The Ability to End the Haredi Secular Conflict, and you said it's within us, but I believe you quoted there a study that Gesher had just done, that the Haredi or the ultra-Orthodox / secular rift is by far the most pressing issue in Israel today. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so first of all, just to answer your question, has it changed? I think it's evolved for sure. It's still with us, and it's still an important rift. I mean, we just did a poll, like you mentioned, with Kantar, one of the leading polling organizations, international polling companies. And what came out was maybe not surprising in the answers, but definitely in its in the numbers. We asked random Israelis what they believe is the most pressing conflict facing Israel today. And by far, 65% of the Jews in Israel believe that the Haredi secular conflict is the most pressing conflict facing us here in Israel today. Now, you think we have peace with our Arab neighbors. I mean, the numbers for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict were like 18%, and the right-left rift was about 14%. And this was at 65%. So it's clearly something that's affecting everybody. Now, again, this is coming on the heels of Corona and the whole COVID crisis here in Israel, which I think really brought out, unfortunately, not only the health crisis, but brought out a societal crisis that's been simmering for a long time, and maybe since the beginning of the state. But I think we see it go up and down in waves. And right now, we're definitely at a climax. We're definitely at a high point where the conflict between Haredi society and general Israeli society is really at a point where there's a lot of tension. And I'm sure you hear it, I hear it all the time from people who we're interacting with, that there's a lot of animosity, whether it's justified or not. Sometimes it's justified and sometimes it's not, on both sides, by the way. In my article that you mentioned, I spoke about non-Haredim who feel like they're, who feel like Haredim are basically living their own autonomous state and making up their own rules. But on the flip side, the Haredim who feel like they're being unfairly picked on every time there was an article during Corona. I mean, you saw this as well. that somebody was not keeping by the health ministry's guidelines is always a picture of Haredi. Now, it's there. The question now is what we can do about it.
So speaking of what we can do about it, as you well know, and as all of our listeners and participants and members of American Friends of Likud are aware, that we are now in the coalition building phase of our fourth election in the last 2 years. Once again, both of the primary Haredi parties have aligned themselves with Prime Minister Netanyahu. But even though that is the case and has been the case in the past, there were statements that went out just in the last couple of days that should this turn into a fifth election, he cannot, and Likud cannot rely on their support yet again. Also, with respect to whether it's a left-right issue, we know that there are those on the right, such as Avigdor Lieberman, who has a tremendous amount of hatred for the Haredim. On the left, there's certainly Yair Lapid has never been a friend of the Haredim, and even myself, we and I were speaking just before we started this, in the modern Orthodox world, so to speak, people that I spoke to during and before and even after the election have said, I don't care what happens, I just don't want the Haredim to be part of the government moving forward, because there's a sense of that community, and it is a generalization, that community siphoning off resources from the state and not giving back to the state. What is Gesher doing, and what is its role in trying to get past these issues?
Well, first of all, we're not a political organization, okay? So I can certainly address your political questions, and I will. I'll get to them. But I think one of the things that I'm lucky, I guess, to say is that we're apolitical, and we really don't deal with politics.
Right, so, but the question is really about the attitudes in general of all sides.
So to address the attitude, some of the programs that we're doing, we built a whole plan actually coming out of Corona to create what we call the societal vaccination, and some of that stuff includes a new program called Et Achai Ani Mivakesh, or Israeli dialogue, where we're working with the Israeli government actually, and our plan is over the next 12 months to run a program where we bring a Gesher facilitator together with Haredi into a secular classroom to create open dialogue, facilitated dialogue, to get the two sides to meet one another in a controlled space, but so at least the fears and the stereotypes can start coming down. And our goal is to do that in 500 classrooms over the next 12 months. And we now have the budget to do that. And literally today we have a parade of Haredi potential facilitators coming through my office who we're interviewing, who can be a part of that program. That's one example. Another example is we're working with the Israeli police, who are a major factor throughout the last year in the protests or in helping through the COVID crisis. And we're working together with them in two ways. One is to create seminars to educate them on dealing with, quote unquote, the other, in particular, the Haredi community, to educate them on who they are, what the different sectors mean, so that when they come there, it's not their first interaction with a Haredi, and they're coming there with all of their built up and pent up anger. That's one program. The other program is to work with Haredim already in the police force to help them accelerate their career paths within the police force, so that we can have senior Haredim also within the police, and on and on. We have other programs as well, and Int'l is a great example, I think, which for a long time was able to bring down the sense of stereotypical fear towards Haredi society, or between the two sectors here in Israeli society. But that's Haredi society. The politicians who are representing their communities, I think, is where your question, what you'd like the answer to, what everyone would like the answer to. And I think I just want to take one thing you said, is that I was going to the fifth election. I think it's going to come up even more if Netanyahu is not successful in forming a government in the next 28 minus 2 days, I guess, 26 days now. And the president is tasked with either going back to a fifth election right away, or giving someone else a chance to form a government. And it's not like the Haredi parties have never sat with a non-Likud government, right? I mean, Rabin had Haredim in his government, and others. It's not like, and Lapid sat with Haredim in the government, by the way, until 2013, if I'm not mistaken. You're the political expert. So it's a possibility that we could see a non-Likud government with Haredim. And I think hearing them talk, it's an extreme possibility. I think it'll be very, very difficult to envision that. And I think there's a great chance still that Netanyahu is going to form a government somehow. I mean, he's the political master of figuring these things out. I heard Shelly Yachimovich on the radio earlier this week, who was former head of the Labor Party and today back to her roots as a radio commentator. The day that Rivlin gave Netanyahu the mandate to form the government, she said she gives him a 95% chance of forming a government just because he's so good at that. That's what he's good at. So we may see a government with the Haredim and Netanyahu again. Now, we're already seeing, it's not just the Haredim, by the way, these days. We had Avi Maoz today from the Tzionut Datit party in the Knesset yesterday, maybe, or today, I'm not sure.
Right, in Smotrich's party, yes.
Yeah, getting into a fight with Rabbi Gilad Kariv, who's a member or a representative of the Reform movement, and getting up from the Knesset, basically saying he's not a rabbi, saying there are no streams in Judaism, and then Rabbi Gilad Kariv, saying, who are you to say who's a Jew and who's not a Jew? This is on day one of the new Knesset. So if this Knesset has a life, it's going to be pretty interesting to see a lot of these arguments play out. And not just between the Haredim and Israeli society, but between all the different sectors. I think we're at a real boiling point here, and we're going to need a lot of help to cure civil society.
So you and I were speaking about this before also, and that is, so what, we know what the issue is, we know the challenges. So how do we get past it? What are the solutions? I don't know if you and I are the ones to actually come up with the solutions, but one thing we know for sure, and that is that it's going to require compromise. It's going to require tolerance. It's going to require us on all sides of this issue to dig deep down. I wanted to ask you, in your experience with both sides of the equation, where do you see, or can you see, those types of levels of tolerance, compromise actually being overcome?
I think the answer is yes. And I think we have to sort of separate the political from the rest of from the real world, if you will. But the issue at hand right now is the political. And I think in the political, there are always ways to find, politics is a game of compromises. Everyone made these grand promises during their campaigns, and someone's going to have to break a promise. Whether it's Saar, whether it's Netanyahu, whether it's the Haredim, whether it's Lapid, whether it's Bennett or whoever. Maybe we're going to have to rely upon the Arab parties to have a minority government, which will be crazy if you think about it, right? And what does that do for the future of Israel? Maybe we're going to have Saar, whose whole entire campaign was based on not joining a Netanyahu government. Or maybe it won't be Netanyahu as the formal prime minister. I saw someone wrote today, he'll be the Rosh Mמשלה Khalifi, what Gantz was, I guess, by title in the previous government. But in that way, Saar can, sneak into the government and still maintain his integrity because he didn't join the Netanyahu prime ministership. Something like that is going to have to happen if we're going to create a government in this round and not go directly into a fifth round of elections, which is also obviously a very high possibility. And in terms of us, the citizens of Israel, it's hard. It's hard. And I think Gesher for decades has stated what's most important is that we meet one another. And over the last year, we haven't been able to get out there and meet one another and work with one another in the workplace or serve with one another and have events with one another. And that, I think, has led to more and more pent up fear and pent up animosity that hasn't had a place to be diffused. And I think the more and more we can meet, and hopefully, thanks to Bibi and Pfizer, we have now the vaccines. Hopefully, the more and more meetings that we can create will diffuse a lot of that pent-up animosity.
So Gesher, the name of Gesher actually means bridge, and that is exactly what Gesher does. It's been around for decades. I know the organization's been around for decades, doing phenomenal work in the communities and bringing and bridging these communities together. If people want more information about where to learn about Gesher and the programs that you run, where do I send them?
So you can email me at jj@gesher.co.il or go to our website, gesher.co.il. Also, gesherusa.org points to the same place, but gesher.co.il, and happy to speak to anybody who's interested in learning more, of course.
So JJ, I want to thank you again for joining us today. I really do appreciate it, learning more about what's going on. Or maybe perhaps we're left with more questions than with answers, but certainly we recognize that we need to, as a community as a whole, as a kihila here in Israel and throughout the world, that all the Jews, if there's one thing that we need to do, and that is to try our best to put our differences aside and come together on those things that we have in common, so that we can move forward stronger. So with that, I want to say thanks, JJ. Thank you for joining us on this AFL podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Adam. Great to see you.